We've all been there. You offer an apology and it just falls flat. In this explainer, we're going to dig into the architecture of an apology that doesn't just put out a fire, but actually helps rebuild the connection stronger than before.
But it's a super frustrating and honestly a familiar feeling, right? You try to make things right after a fight, but somehow the I'm sorry you offer only seems to make things a whole lot worse. So why does that keep happening?
You can picture the scene. You take a deep breath, you go back into the room, and you say the words you are sure they need to hear. But instead of relief on their face, you get even more frustration. And you're just left standing there totally confused, thinking, but I said I was sorry. What went wrong? Okay, so to figure that out, here's our game plan. We'll start by looking at why so many apologies fail, and we'll define this thing called a non-apology. Then we're going to unpack the 4 essential parts of a real apology, see why actions speak way louder than words, and finally, get how all of this builds a foundation for real trust. The simple, honest truth is that most of us were just never really taught how to apologize in a way that actually heals anything. We're just repeating the patterns we saw growing up, and a lot of the time, those patterns are, well, they're pretty broken. So, let's get right to the heart of the problem. At the root of almost every single failed apology is something that researchers have a name for: the non-apology. A non-apology is kind of like a magic trick. It uses all the right words, like I'm sorry, but it's completely hollow inside. It doesn't take any real responsibility, and it for sure doesn't repair any damage. In fact, these things often do way more harm than just staying silent, because they send a clear message. I want this fight to be over, but I don't actually think I did anything wrong. Okay, now just look at the difference here. On the left, that's pure deflection. I'm sorry you feel that way basically says the problem isn't my actions, it's your feelings. And I'm sorry but? That's just an excuse wearing an apology's clothing. But the language on the right, that's about ownership. It's direct, it's accountable, and it's the very first step toward making things right. So, how do we actually get it right? Well, lucky for us, there's a really clear roadmap. The psychologist Dr. Harriet Lerner, after decades of research into this stuff, broke down exactly what a genuine, effective apology requires. And what she found is that there are 4, just 4, essential components. And here's the kicker. If you miss even one of them, the whole apology can just fall apart. So here's the framework. It's pretty simple. First, you have to name it. Then, you acknowledge the impact. After that, you commit to change. And finally, you give them space. So let's break each one down. All right, the first step is all about getting crystal clear and specific. You can't just mumble, I'm sorry for, what happened. You have to explicitly name your mistake out loud without trying to downplay it or make any excuses. Listen to that. It's so powerful. This isn't some vague, sorry I was a jerk. It's, I'm sorry I dismissed your feelings and talked over you. This shows the other person that you actually get it. You know exactly what you did wrong, and that is the very first thing they need to hear from you. Okay, next up, you have to acknowledge the impact your actions had. Now, this is a huge one. Your intention does not matter nearly as much as you think it does. You might not have meant to hurt them, but your good intentions don't just magically erase the pain they actually felt. A real apology has to focus on their experience, not on your intent. Now, this statement right here, this is what true empathy sounds like. You're showing them that not only do you see what you did, but you also understand the emotional damage it caused. You're validating their feelings. You're basically saying, you have every right to feel this way, and I'm the one who made you feel it. All right, so we've covered naming the mistake and owning the impact. Both of those are really about the past, about what already happened. This third component is where we pivot and start looking toward the future. And honestly, this is where the vast majority of apologies fail. Words are cheap, right? Without a real, genuine commitment to change your behavior, an apology is just, well, it's manipulation. An apology isn't the end of a conflict, it's the beginning of doing things differently. The other person doesn't need perfect words. They need to see evidence that you're actually trying to grow. And again, look how specific that is. It's not all try to be a better listener. It is a concrete, actionable promise. I will put my phone away. I will take a walk to cool down before I respond. This gives them something real to hold on to and proves you're serious about not letting this happen over and over again. And that brings us to the fourth and maybe the most overlooked part of a real apology. After you've done all this, after you've delivered this genuine, heartfelt apology, your job is to let go. You have to give up control and give them the space they need to process it all. This means you can't apologize and then 5 minutes later get upset because they haven't gotten over it yet. You don't get to decide how long it takes them to heal. They do. Real accountability means you accept all the consequences of what you did, and one of those consequences might be that it's going to take some time to rebuild that trust. So, when you actually put all 4 of these pieces together, what you're really doing is making a massive mindset shift. It's about moving away from defending yourself and moving towards repairing the connection. Look, this framework isn't just a script you memorize. It's a blueprint for a shift in your character. It's the difference between protecting your ego and protecting a relationship. It's about trading that short-term win of being right for the much more important long-term work of real, lasting change. And in the end, it really all comes down to this one question. The next time you find yourself needing to apologize, this is what you have to ask yourself. Because being able to answer yes to this, well, that's not a sign of weakness. It's the very foundation of trust, respect, and the kind of love that actually lasts.